Hello YouTube, it is Dominoid here once again with another retro gaming video, and this time we are looking at everyone's favourite clown. No, it isn't Pennywise, it's Mr. Do. So here's the thing, a lot of retro gamers tend to dismiss Mr. Do as being basically just a rip-off of Dig Dug. You can certainly see why. Both of the games came out in 1982 and they do have some relatively similar mechanics in being maze-type games which feature digging and destroying beasties. But lots of games in the 80s had similar mechanics, so is it really fair to level that criticism and dismiss Universal's most successful title as being just a Dig Dug clone? Now, I came across Mr. Do long before I'd ever heard of Dig Dug. It would have been about 1987 or so. I was still a very young boy. At the time, my elder brother was an engineer for a company which sold fruit machines and arcade games. Mr. Do was, by that point, a few years old, so the company didn't really want it. They lent it to him to use alongside an old 10-in-1 Nintendo cabinet. He didn't really have room for both, so I ended up being lent the Mr. Do cabinet, and he kept the Nintendo one. He duly converted that Mr. Do cabinet to free play for me, and that started an addiction that I still hold to this day. Now, the history of the game is something of a mystery. Back then, publishers liked to keep their name as the prominent thing, and programmers' names were largely kept out of the limelight. This is how you ended up with things like the infamous Easter egg in Adventure on the VCS, for example. What I have been able to find out is that the game was largely created by a gentleman by the name of Kazutoshi Ueda, and if he by some miracle happens to be watching, I apologise if I have pronounced your name wrong. I don't speak any Japanese and you have a name that's complicated to my tongue. Anyway, he was rumoured to also be one of the main creators of Universal's 1981 release Ladybug, and that makes a lot of sense. It was also a maze game. It featured a number of elements that saw more popularity later in Mr. Do, such as the enemy extra letters. So this makes the Dig Dug rip-off accusation even less accurate to me, because Ladybug came out first out of all of them. The principle of the game is pretty simple. You are Mr. Do, you're a Powerball wielding clown, and you have to consume a very large amount of cherries whilst being chased by monsters. Presumably this is because recreational drugs were more expensive than video games in the 1980s. You can complete levels by eating all of the cherries, or by killing all of the monsters, either by pushing human-sized apples onto their heads, or by throwing your Powerball at them. There's also a secondary mode which is activated by eating a dessert which will appear in the centre of the screen. It'll be a ice cream or a cake or something like that. And triggering that results in these charming beasties led by a letter monster coming after you. You kill the letter monster, it destroys the crocodile head monsters, they turn into apples, and it gives you another letter on that extra section up there at the top of the screen. You light up all of those letters, you will then complete the level that you're currently on and get an extra life. There's also a fourth way of completing a level, although this is rare. Occasionally a smashed apple will reveal a diamond, and collecting this will get you both a level completion and also a free game, so a credit on the machine. That's something you see often in pinball, so if you're a pinball fan you'll no doubt have seen that at the end of almost every electronic sort of computerized pinball machine. But it's not something you saw very often at all in arcade games, so it's something that's quite rare and quite unique to Mr. Do. Now, perhaps I'm biased because I played this one first, but personally I feel Mr. Do is the superior game. The thing is, I find in Dig Dug there is generally a perfect way to complete each level, and memorising that means it leads to completion most of the time. But the enemies in Mr. Do are random. The apple placements are not entirely random, but they're not completely fixed. So it adds an element of more challenge, like Pac-Man, where the game is never the same twice. So for me, that means that Mr. Do is a better game. There's more twitch reflex action compared to Namco's title. Now, don't get me wrong, Dig Dug is great, brilliant game, but Mr. Do, for me, is just so much better. Now, in the version that we know and love, Mr. Do is a clown. He actually started life, though, as a farmer in the prototype version of the game, which is called Yukidorama. This makes a bit more sense, as a farmer would have far more reason to be digging around after cherries than a clown. That said, Yukidorama means snowman, and he does indeed appear to be made of frozen water. He's also carrying some kind of pitchfork or possibly a rake, and when he dies, his head explodes because Japan. Now, as far as I can tell, this machine wasn't distributed outside of Japan. It was purely a pilot, and the company making it is also listed as Yukidorama. They never had any other machines either under that name, so presumably this was a pseudonym that Universal used before finishing the machine, and eventually they ended up licensing it to Taito for Japanese distribution. There were a few sequels to the game as well. First of all, we had Mr. Do's Castle. That saw you being attacked by unicorns in a Lode Runner style platform game. It was released to arcades in 1982. It saw a decent amount of success, but it never quite managed to replicate the success of the first game. Now, this is a shame because actually it's quite a nice little game. And in 2017, unicorn merchandise seems to be all the rage. It's in all the department stores, it's in Primark, it's in John Lewis. Everything's got a unicorn on it. So maybe it's time that we had a high-def remake of it, assuming of course that somebody knows who owns the rights to it all these years on. Universal of course left the video games industry years ago, so it's probably lost to the annals of time by now. But if it isn't, and if anyone who knows about that is watching it, then get on that. I will buy that right away. 1984 saw two Mr. Do games released. The first was Mr. Do's Wild Ride, which is a sort of roller coaster themed puzzle. It's got elements of Donkey Kong in it and elements of Scale X tricks. It's a difficult one to describe, so the best thing to do here is just look at the pretty visuals on the screen showing you how the game was played, because, well, it's like this, really, the way that you see right now. It's also super hard as well, and in my opinion, nowhere near as good as the other games, but it exists, so I'm mentioning it here. Now, interestingly, this one saw an unofficial home port from Ocean on the Spectrum, Amstrad and Commodore. However, they decided that they weren't content with just plagiarising one company, so instead they made it a sequel to their previous Nintendo ripoff, Kong. It wasn't very good, but it did give Ocean a taste for using other people's IPs, as they went on to do more through far more official means over time, of course, with classics like Robocop, The Untouchables and Waterworld. The last game in the series was released only as a conversion kit, making it quite rare and not as many people have played it. This is a shame because it's actually a very good game. This was mainly due to the video game crash, meaning that nobody wanted to buy arcade cabinets from scratch anymore. So thanks, Atari. Called Do Run Run. It was presumably a reference to the old 60s song by the Crystals, and that's a reference that probably went right over the heads of the children of 1984, who by that time were listening to Simple Minds, Iron Maiden and the Smiths. Now, Do Run Run took elements from Pac-Man and Kix to produce a hybrid game that's actually quite a lot of fun. There were also plans for a Laserdisc title to be called Adventure Mr. Do. This was going to be released on Universal's Laser System 1 arcade unit, but the aforementioned lack of interest from arcade owners meant that this system was discontinued after just one title, and Universal then left the arcade business entirely. So that gave a rather poor end to the Mr. Do story. Although the super colourful remake of the original game on the Neo Geo in 1996, that helped to give my favourite clown a good footnote, if not a decent final chapter. And speaking of footnotes, I have one for this video as it happens. Now, bear in mind, I've been playing this game over the last 30 years on and off, so I'm reasonably good at it, and I have managed to see all of the 10 levels it has. There's no ending, it just loops when it gets back to the end of level 10. You start again at level 1, but you do get like a little cool countdown going, hey, you're cool, you beat level 10. Now, it was only through researching this video, though, that I realised that there's some very specific design choices in the levels. So see if you can spot it in this rundown. So here's level 1, level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Did not notice that for 30 years. Now, from the things I found online when I was researching for this video as well, I'm not the first person who didn't spot this for a few decades. So if you haven't spotted it either, then don't feel bad. I'm not going to. Well, maybe a little bad. So that's all for this time. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't played any of the games that I've shown, then please do check them out. Mr. Do's got a really nice rich history, and I think really underrated because of the existence of Dig Dug, so check those out. Especially Do Run Run, really obscure. I haven't played it before this video, but it's really addictive, really good fun. Anyway, there will be new content coming soon, so do please click on that subscribe button and click on the bell so you can be the first to know when new content comes. I would appreciate it if you'd give me a like and some comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, then please do let me know, and if you didn't, then let me know too, because I'm only going to make them better if you tell me why they're crap in the first place. Until next time though, thank you very much, cheers YouTube, and goodbye.